Hello, good afternoon. It is your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, and today's date is Thursday, October 16th, 2025. The time is 12:45 p.m., and I am in Miami, Florida. The topic of today's lecture is the perception filter. And before I begin this lecture, I would like to say a number of words concerning the audacity of the matter at hand, particularly with respect to the stalkers themselves, whom I have asserted are constantly creating false narratives about the actions, nature, and character of the targeted individual so as to have a pretext to continue descending upon him. Because like I say, there is particularly with the liaisons and the undercovers, who you could look as at the manager and assistant manager of the stalkers, with the liaisons being the manager and the undercovers being the assistant manager, and the stalkers being the people on the front lines. Particularly with the liaisons and the undercover operatives, they have to constantly create a false narrative as to why this targeted person needs to be approached, or rather descended upon constantly by the gang stalking mechanism here in the United States. They constantly have to have a reason. Otherwise, they are just perpetrating acts of state-assisted thuggery, which is a prospect that is very unattractive to them. So they have to constantly keep coming up with these narratives as to why the targeted person is subversive, why they're disruptive, why they're threatening, why they are of concern, why they're at risk. And it's not just enough to write down on paper or in some database somewhere, some federally kept database, this person, Smith, is all of the things we say he is. So we are going to constantly mobilize fellow American citizens against him in a hostile or belligerent manner, so as to keep him under control. Because without our control, he will certainly run amok and wreak havoc and devastation everywhere he goes. You see, it's not enough for a liaison or a federal contractor that works with these liaisons in the intelligence or national security apparatus in this country to simply write that down somewhere. They need to constantly reinforce this narrative that I am somehow of, or rather a particular danger to the United States or to a particular person or groups. So what they do is this constant surveillance and disruption mechanism that I have experienced in heightened levels over the past 10 years is derived, and it is a way of constantly putting me in situations where I'm being essentially provoked by unnamed strangers across the demographic spectrum in such ways that might cause me to become wrathful or anxious. You see, to the point where I get angry. And that's what they want. They want to provoke me until I get angry. And then if something transpires out of anger, or let's say hypothetically I commit a crime of passion, as they say, then they would have a full-blown justification for their stalking mechanism. They would say, hey, see, we told you he was out there. We told you he was a threat. We told you he was subversive to society, that he was disruptive. See, we told you. When all the while, they're the ones that instigated the conflict in the first place. And it creates a vicious cycle of provocations by the stalkers and reactions by the target. When the target reacts, they create a new narrative of why he should be surveilled and disrupted. But on the flip side of that, that shows the targeted person to be in between, as they say, a rock and a hard place. Because if the target retaliates against his stalkers in any capacity, verbally, physically, if it's necessary in self-defense, okay, then they renew their justification and create a new false narrative of why this person is out of control. However, if the target just lays back and allows the liaisons, allows the undercover operatives, allows the stalkers to continually pester, disrupt, yes, and or attack him without recourse, without self-defense, without verbal conflict or confrontations, then they will do that to the target every chance they get. Their goal is to trample you. You see, it's not to teach you a lesson, okay? It's not to teach you anything. It's not to instruct you on anything. The goal is to disrupt you hand and foot forever. And in such a way that the rest of society is going to have a difficult problem seeing the disruption. You see, that's why it's called covert war. It is a state-sanctioned war against a targeted person that is supposed to be hidden. It's supposed to be clandestine. It's supposed to be undercover. It's supposed to be behind the scenes. No one is supposed to be able to know that this target is being descended upon by signaled stalkers. You see, it's supposed to be a quiet war against the targeted person. And most people in the United States who are out and about, who have nothing to do with gang stalking, who have never experienced gang stalking, they wouldn't know what to look for. So it's hidden in that regard. But ultimately, this program is a situation, it presents a situation rather, where a number of national security liaisons got together and said, we can engineer and or direct the trajectory of American society. We can make society go where we want it to go. Okay? With this covert signaling mechanism, we can ensure that certain citizens are able to succeed and establish themselves and other citizens are not, based on the criteria that we choose. It doesn't have to agree with the Constitution. Okay? It doesn't have to agree with the Declaration of Independence. It's whatever we think is the right thing to do based on the data we have about American society and what makes a society run properly. So if this guy Smith is a person that we don't think, based on our data, is the kind of person that can make society run properly, or if we don't even think he's the kind of person that can contribute to society, we'll just throw him into a gang stalking campaign. Who's going to care? It's just him. We're not going to need any justification other than the one we create in the national security apparatus of this country. We'll throw him into a gang stalking campaign, and then other government auxiliaries can monitor his behavior and collect data. And we can learn how to do social engineering tactics and use him as a guinea pig. The audacity of the matter is stunning. The audacity of the matter is unprecedented, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm expendable, according to the federal apparatus of this country, and my rights as a citizen have been extrajudicially revoked. If the orchestrators of this thing, who are really a bunch of boys who want to play God and control society using a number of useful idiots who use a signaling mechanism to find and disrupt persons to the financial benefit of the military-industrial complex, which sells the technology to the federal government to prosecute gang stalking campaigns, and to the detriment of the targeted person who cannot get his feet underneath him because every step he takes is disrupted. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let us get to the meat of the matter. This lecture is called the Perspective Filter. Now, I've asserted in previous lectures that gang stalking is both an enterprise and an entity. It is a way to enrich the investors in military industrial grade weapons technology, because that technology is needed to prosecute gang stalking campaigns. Please see my lectures on weapons technology and gang stalking for more. And it is a mechanism that allows certain persons in various industries, but definitely the national security apparatus, to initiate various clandestine protocols against the life of a targeted person who has been pre-selected for this program called gang stalking. Now, what this does is it allows the military-industrial complex to reap gigantic government contracts. And mind you, we need these gigantic government contracts with respect to the military-industrial complex, because the military-industrial complex is basically the industry that creates all military materials and weapons and surveillance technology and various other technologies that are needed for the Department of Defense, which is also known as the Armed Services. Every piece of equipment they have is produced by the military-industrial complex, which is a system of weapons manufacturers and aerospace and defense firms that basically develop and manufacture military-industrial grade weapons technology and surveillance equipment and sell it at a cost of $2 trillion a year to the United States government, who purchases it using taxpayer money and then gives it to its armed services and its various semi-military, federal law enforcement, and law enforcement bodies for use in their various occupations. But a lot of this A lot of this military industrial grade technology is not used by the majority of Department of Defense personnel, including the soldiers. Some of this weapons technology is used exclusively in gang stalking campaigns. Okay, if you were to ask the most experienced Marine in the United States Armed Services, I'm talking the Marine who has 30 years on the job, which is typically the length of time you go before you retire as a Marine. Go talk to the most experienced Marine you can find and say, "Hello, sir. Can you tell me what Vercator is? Can you tell me what Gyrotron is? Can you tell me what ultra low frequency is? Can you tell me what smart dust is? Can you tell me what hydrogel is? Can you tell me what Raven's Claw is? Can you tell me what brain-to-brain interface is? Can you tell me what whole mind uploading is? Can you tell me what Project Echelon is? Can you tell me what World Sentient Simulation is?" That Marine, that experienced Marine, that soldier who has been a member of the armed forces for 30 years would look at you and go cross-eyed. He would have no idea what any of those objects, what any of that technology, what any of those things are. Because the typical U.S. soldier does not know the depth or the nature or the quality of the types of military-grade industrial weapons and surveillance equipment that are used against targeted individuals in gang stalking campaigns. When you join the Army, when you join the Marines, when you join the Air Force, when you join the Navy, they do a lot of training and they do a lot of exams, but none of them discuss silent technologies for surveillance on private citizens. None of those exams, none of those academic textbooks, none of those lectures that their superior officers give them discuss the effects of radio electric magnetic frequencies on a person over a given period. Okay? None of those courses that these armed service personnel go through examines what a stemoceiver is and what its effect on the human brain is and when it was created and how it was created and how it's used in studies and projects and so forth. You see, there's no course or class you can take that explains street theater. There's no course or class you can take that explains synchronization. There's no course or class that any member of the armed services takes that explains HARP, okay? There is no class or instruction that any member of the armed forces undergoes that allows them to understand better what signaling between two citizens is with respect to them pointing out who the target in the area is. There's no course or class that you can take in the U.S. Armed Forces or as a member of the U.S. Armed Forces, rather, that would explain synchronized vehicular obstruction of movement and how that mechanism is designed to point out somebody as a target or suspicious person when they're out and about. These are all things that they don't teach the armed services. These are things they don't teach law enforcers when they're in police academy. You want to know why, ladies and gentlemen? It's because these practices are objectionable. And any armed forces staffer, any law enforcement officer that hears these things would become disgusted at them and immediately question the integrity of using these methods on United States citizens, especially by their federal government. I have drawn a map for my listeners as to how gang stalking came into being, how and why it operates, and where it's going. Now, I'm going to condense that map for you right now. Okay? It started with COINTELPRO, which was a federally designed disruption mechanism in which members of the community were taught in secret to disrupt the personal lives of the members of the Ku Klux Klan, the Black Panther Party, the American Communist Party, and other politically dissident groups. Now, this protocol worked because those groups that were very active in the 1960s when COINTELPRO was introduced, they were all eventually dissolved and are not functioning today in the same capacity that they were in the 1960s. So the FBI, with its construction, the engineering, the concoction, and the implementation of COINTELPRO, successfully got rid of those political dissident groups by disrupting the members using the various people in their respective communities as semi-deputized disruptors. Okay, and the members of the community that these various political dissident members lived in found ways to either harass them out of the community or otherwise disrupt their flow of living. It's called a biorhythm. The biorhythm of the members of these various political dissident groups was disrupted by the members of their societies. And the FBI was at the center of this activity, which means it was a government-directed protocol. Now, ultimately, COINTELPRO as a program was abolished, and the FBI renounced it as no longer needed, or rather deemed it as no longer needed, and the program was officially voided. However, its blueprint stayed alive, and its potential to bring about social change in a clandestine fashion using members of the community as disruptors stayed alive. And from the 1960s to the 2000s, the program was reinvented, reanalyzed, re-examined, and re-implemented as something that became known as gang stalking. Now, the way gang stalking operates today, it's very similar to the FBI's COINTELPRO program. But rather than the disruption of political dissident groups, now it's aimed at disrupting the lives of select U.S. citizens for no identifiable reason. And the reason there's no identifiable reason is because the reason that people are put in gang stalking campaigns has been left to speculation. The U.S. federal establishment has not authorized a comprehensive list or a chart or any document that explains why some people experience this program and others don't. I've given reasons based on my research and based on the various documents on gang stalking that I've read online as fairly reliable. I mean, I've found a number of causes myself, which include things like having made the wrong enemy, somebody who's aware of gang stalking and they refer you to someone plugged into the program as someone who needs to be disrupted or taught a lesson. There's the you being a political dissident. Maybe you are very outspoken on a political cause. Maybe you have disrupted town hall meetings or made explicit threats to elected officials. If you're known to engage in online activity that is seen as supportive of terrorism or terrorist activity, you could be descended from a Ku Klux Klan member or a Black Panther member or a member of the American Communist Party and be thrown in a gang stalking campaign the day you're born as a way of essentially punishing the members of those dissident groups by targeting their children and their offspring. Okay? Being a beneficiary in a living will and testament. Okay, there are a lot of different possible reasons that a person winds up in a gang stalking campaign. But these reasons that I've examined in my own research and reasons that I've come to conclusions on my own are still speculation. This program is run behind the scenes. There's no Senate floor debates. There are no Supreme Court rulings. There's no media debate. There's no debate among the local legislatures or town halls of the United States. There's no academic journal or peer-reviewed journal or academic textbook that has federally acknowledged or judicially examined conclusions on what gang stalking is. There is nothing out there that is considered official documentation, and that's by design. Gang stalking, its auspices, it's top secret. Okay, this is top secret information. And ever since Julian Assange and his WikiLeaks program proved to be what the Greek philosopher Socrates would refer to as a gadfly, or rather a thorn in the side of the U.S. federal establishment with respect to its capacity to leak top secret government information into the public sphere where it should be. Okay, Julian Assange was eventually federally charged with all kinds of espionage and treason charges simply for making public what the U.S. federal government was up to. His company was able to hack into the computers of federal databases and gather top secret records about what the federal government was up to, and he released it to the public. There's nothing wrong with that. This is democracy in a constitutional republic. The people, the taxpayer, they have a right to know everything that's going on in the United States federal government, including its national security apparatus. And I think Julian Assange had to flee to another country at some point. But ultimately, I don't know if WikiLeaks has any information on gang stalking or not. It would be nice to see declassified top secret information on clandestine gang stalking. But given the breadth, the depth, and the complexity, not to mention the amoral ethical considerations of clandestine gang stalking, I imagine that the United States probably guards information related to gang stalking even more closely than it guards information related to Benghazi or September 11th or COINTELPRO or Operation Hoodwink or MK Ultra or the Tuskegee experiments, various other behavioral and psychological experiments that are being conducted on human beings on a daily basis in this country. I imagine gang stalking its information is more closely guarded than any of the other top secret types of information that exist. And the reason is because this program has the capacity, it has the ability to completely and irrevocably damage the United States' reputation at home and abroad. If what gang stalking really is and what it aims to do becomes public knowledge, the United States is through as a moral authority. Never again will the United States federal establishment be able to go out into the world and lecture other countries on human rights. Because quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, clandestine gang stalking is not only thuggish and cowardly, hostile and degenerate, atrocious and treacherous, but it's also treasonous and it's a crime against humanity. I, your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, am the first person online to designate gang stalking as a human rights catastrophe and one that could damage the United States' reputation around the world. The orchestrators should have thought of that before they implemented it into the United States legal code by stealth through Congress on the coattails of national security legislation. That should have been pre-calculated before this thing was ever even enacted. We don't need anything like this in society. Society would run just fine without a clandestine disruption mechanism. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, the perception filter that is present with respect to the exposure and understanding of clandestine gang stalking is enormous. The perception filter was already in play before the program was implemented. Just in case one of those targets decides to come forward about gang stalking, let's have a system of, let's disrupt the truth. Okay, let's change people's perceptions of the matter. If anyone decides to come forward about this program, let's change what the outside world thinks about it. Let's make it so that the targeted person is labeled as psychotic or schizophrenic or has borderline personality disorder or is antisocial. That's one way that the perception filter is altered. Because if a person comes forward about a human rights disaster, of course the federal government of that country, they don't want people to think that, even if it's the truth. Sometimes governments don't want people to see the truth because it would reduce faith in government. But ultimately, a government can only get away with what you let it get away with. So the federal establishment of this country does not want people to think or know that it has not only implemented but has continued to finance and reinforce such a program. Now, labeling the person as mentally insane or mentally unstable or something to that effect changes the lens by which people look at gang stalking. It looks like this certified psychologist and this certified psychiatric professional and this syndicated newspaper and this peer-reviewed psychology journal say that there is no gang stalking. And that the people who exhibit the kind of behaviors that believe that they're being perpetually harassed in a synchronized fashion, they're the kind of people that belong in a straitjacket in a padded room. That's what these qualified professionals are saying. That's one way to offset the truth from manifesting. You're altering people's perception. You're altering people's perspective of this program by denying its existence by calling the people who come forward about it psychotic. How else does the federal establishment, particularly the National Security Auxiliary of this country, deflect the truth about clandestine gang stalking? Well, they block the flow of information. If you're not on Emmanuel Isaiah Smith's website or any other website that talks about gang stalking candidly, you're not going to know what it is or where it comes from. Because the flow of information is blocked to disable people from creating a perspective on it. The national security apparatus wants to run this program for as long as possible. And not only that, they want to run it and then pass its auspices down to the next generation so you can have a new generation of stalkers, liaisons, and undercovers. Blocking the flow of information is another way that people's perspectives on gang stalking can be controlled. I've said in previous lectures, ladies and gentlemen, that the American news media, the American religious establishment, and Congress itself are puppets of the national security apparatus in this country. All they have to do is say, well, this is in the interest of national security that you not talk about this. This is in the interest of your personal safety for you not to talk about this. Pastor, don't say nothing about gang stalking, okay? The people that talk about it are nuts. This is a good country. It's a great country. This is not the kind of country that would allow something like that to manifest. Don't you talk to your congregation about this, Pastor. It's in the interest of national security. Then they mosey on over to your news station and go to the producers of your local news and your cable news stations and say, hey, we see you guys doing Google searches on gang stalking. You better tell your news anchors not to do nothing, not to talk about that on the air. Don't you say nothing about no clandestine gang stalking. Talk about something else that the people want to hear. Talk about that barn out in rural Kentucky that fell down a sinkhole. Okay, talk about the catalytic converter theft epidemic that's going on in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Talk about how Samoan music has influenced the Tongan people over in Polynesia. Okay, talk about how this year's spelling bee had more Maldivian entrants, had more Maldivian participants than any other spelling bee in history. Talk instead about who's going to do this year's Super Bowl performance and how that Super Bowl performance is going to be a socially significant occurrence. Don't talk about clandestine gang stalking. It's not in the interest of national security. Rather, I would rather you talk about that new shopping mall that's being built over in Havana, Cuba. It's a beautiful shopping mall. I hear they're going to build a Sbarro's Pizza in there. Go on the air and talk about how Sbarro's Pizza has changed the landscape of the pizza chain industry in this country over the last 30 years. You could do a 50-part special on why Sbarro's Pizza has endured through the ages. Don't talk about clandestine gang stalking. Talk about how bears in the woods of Canada have learned to catch fish using their hind legs instead of their front legs, and how that contributes to the evolution of species. Okay, there's 1,000,001 other topics that you can talk about other than organized stalking, community harassment, gang stalking, covert war. There's 1,000,000 other things you can talk about in the news. So, talk about something else, because we, the national security apparatus in this country, know better, and we're telling you that this program is good for national security, but we don't want anyone to believe that it even exists, because that could cause a problem for us. People might start thinking that we're corrupt or something. There's 1,000,001 other things you can talk about in your local newspapers. Don't talk about gang stalking. We'll find you something to talk about. Talk about how NASA has built remote control cars and flown them to Mars. They got video cameras on them. We can see the Martian terrain. It's beautiful technology, some of the most sophisticated technology that humankind has ever seen. They're called Mars rovers. Yeah, we know there ain't no aliens on Mars. We know there ain't no aliens nowhere in our solar system, but let's pretend that there is, so we'll have a reason to keep sending billions of dollars of equipment, all of which were purchased by the taxpayer, into outer space, so we can have a better idea of what our solar system is like. Talk about that. We don't need to talk about gang stalking. It's inconsequential. Do you hear anybody complaining? No, you hear Smith complaining. There are another of other targeted individuals or so-called targeted individuals. They're complaining. But by and large, American society is not complaining. So why make a big deal out of it? And those media bosses over at your local and cable television stores, they give them the old salute and they shut up about it. Congress too. All right, there are closed door top secret meetings being had about this. We need to make sure Congress doesn't talk about gang stalking too openly. We don't want the American people getting scared or distrustful. We don't want a rebellion to happen. Gang stalking is too controversial. Go to the Speaker of the House. Go to each congressional member quietly and let them know you don't talk about gang stalking. You don't talk about anything that has to do with it. Do not mention it to the American people. Just don't. It'll disrupt society if you do, Congressman. And as a matter of fact, Congressman, if you talk about this country bad, like that Smith guy is doing, you know what's going to happen? People ain't going to vote for you next election time. You're going to have to go back to operating that computer store over in Jerkwater, USA. That congressman say, what, give up this job to go back to managing a computer store? No, I promise you, I won't talk about gang stalking. No, I won't. There's no way in heaven or hell that I'd ever leave this good congressional job to go back and work in a computer store. Oh no. I'm going to stay on the job. And if that means shutting my mouth about clandestine gang stalking, well, that's what I'll do. I won't say a word about it. Thank you, Congressman. You know it's in the interest of national security that you do keep your mouth shut about this. It's called a perspective filter, ladies and gentlemen. Controlling what people think about a topic. And once that narrative is given to you by your media and by your elected officials and by your pastors, that is the narrative that is the mainstream or accepted narrative. It doesn't have to be right. It doesn't have to be accurate. It doesn't have to be correct. But it is the official narrative of this country. It's the narrative that your establishment has given you. So it's going to be the narrative that you use. And it's going to be the narrative that you teach your kids. If you want to live in a peaceful and stable society, you don't have to know the whole truth about what your government does to its own citizens. You don't have to know what's really going on. All you need to know is enough to where the world makes sense to you. Then you go back to your lives and you live them. Guys like Smith, the ones who go a little too far, the ones who dig a little too deep, the ones who are a little too mouthy, the ones who have their interpretation of the truth that is the inconvenient truth that could harm his country's image, well, don't you be like him, because otherwise you're going to be called antisocial. If you want to be part of the in crowd, you'll accept the narrative that your newspapers, your government, and your pastor give you. And we give them those narratives ourselves because these are the safest narratives that are out there. You want to know the whole truth? Here's the whole truth. You don't know nothing. And you don't need to know nothing. All you need to know is how to raise your family, how to pay your bills, how to pay your taxes, how to vote in elections, and how to work your job. That's the only thing you need to know. If you're a religious person, fine, that's good. Learn how to worship your God properly, and you will live a beautiful life in this country. Me, myself, ladies and gentlemen, your host, I don't need anything from society. I am that gadfly that Socrates talked about 375 years before Christ. I am here to be a thorn in the side of my federal government. Why? Because my federal government has waged a private war on my person that has persisted since I was a teenager, and that I've seen in heightened levels since the age of 30. That would have been 10 years ago now. So, as a man, as a free-thinking human organism on this planet, I'm not about to let that slide. That's not flying. I have decided to defend myself administratively against this covert war that has been waged against me by the national security apparatus in this country. I have decided to defend myself. I would hate to see the condition of other targeted persons who have been placed in this program who were not able to properly defend themselves or quantify what was happening to them. I'm sorry for those people. I'm sorry that your government did that to you. I can only imagine what dire straits you're in because of what you experience. All I can say to you is that I hope you remain in good health and you remain hopeful and you remain vigilant. There was a time in this country, particularly over the last 40 years, where there may have been some gang stalking going on, but it was so rare and so few and far in between that no one ever noticed it. But I guess around 2015, the orchestrators of it said, hey, let's go full throttle on this thing. Let's see who survives it and who don't. Well, you see one person standing here right now who survived it. And not only have I survived it, but I'd like to help others survive it. I want to see it eradicated and I want to see it repealed. I want to see the hostile actors in this program prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And I want to see the gang stalkers, liaisons, undercovers, and various other operatives in this thing who have murdered people. I want to see them get the death penalty. I want to see them arrested and charged, and I want to see them receive capital punishment. On my behalf, on behalf of my significant other, and on behalf of every target who's had to go through life with this thing. All right? You use the power of the state to bring about someone's demise. That is treason and it is mass murder. Thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen.